Welcome to Foothold America's U.S. Expansion Mini-Pod, 3 questions, 1 voice. I'm your host, Joanne Farquharson, President and CEO of Foothold America. Today we have another Joanne with us. Joanne Fedeyko is a Silicon Valley founder, networker, investor, leader of multiple accelerators, publisher of Disruption Magazine, and all-around great person to connect with in the San Francisco Silicon Valley corridor. Alrighty, let's get started with our 3 questions, hearing 1 voice. Ms. Joanne Fedeyko. So, you have founded, invested in, and led numerous organizations, many with the goal of accelerating the growth of companies in the U.S. So some of the groups are industry specific, so life science or tech. You've done some things. Some are specifically for Canadian companies as a native Canadian, and others are geared toward female entrepreneurs. So what I'm wondering is, how do the pathways to U.S. success differ among these groups, if they do?
Yeah. Well, I've focused a lot with Canada in the last 10 plus years, but in the last year, I've gone more global. So a bit of different perspective there. Yes, strong focus within the life sciences. And what I'd say for that group, or sort of any regulated group, is that it does tend to be helpful if you can create some validation and traction within your home market first. Yes. So in Canada, getting Canadian health approval before going to the US for FDA sometimes can really be more helpful for those companies for various reasons, right? Because they've gone and validated, they've got that traction, they've gone through that rigor and some of the process, even though they're different with it. I'm not sure that the FDA exactly goes, okay, Canada Health, that's a big check. I think they still do all of their rigor with it. But it just gets them going and gets them into their market on that front. And I see that a bit with the financial regulatory side as well, but I'd say for sure on the life sciences side, that tends to be
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say I completely agree with you. It's not like a check mark, but in the life sciences in the UK and Europe, I'd say that's what most of them are do. It's like, okay, let's get traction here in the home country. But so that's interesting. That's similar. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. And then in tech, what I find interesting, again, a lot of lens that I have is on the Canadian market. But I've started to work with some, Japanese companies, some groups from Seoul, some from India, Abu Dhabi, different things. But when it's tech and it's SaaS and it's AI now, there's no borders, right, for it. Right. But then I think it becomes a mindset thing and what people are comfortable with. I talked to a lot of founders, just talked to one last week where she was going to kind of grow in Western Canada first and then maybe go across Canada and then go to the US. And there was no barrier for her to do that other than that's what she knew and was comfortable with. So I think in tech and whatnot, it doesn't really matter. You should really go to the US. Just reading the article this morning about, US first, or global first, actually, not US first, global first. And I feel like that is a great mindset for entrepreneurs that are looking to build ultimately a global business or, something big for them, is to not worry about those borders and to think about, where are my customers? How can I quickly be scaling, get into the customers that I want, be in front of, potential capital that I need as well for it. And the US tends to be just an incredible place for those things. And so I think the other industries really should look to the US. Food and agri-tech, that's another one that possibly, different regions for those obvious reasons for them. But, where your customers are and where the capital is that you need, I feel like that should determine where you're going first and how you're getting there.
Right. That's right. So I think with mindset, that's a very good point. And it may also be a little bit of confidence as well, because I see this all the time. If I'm looking at competitors and I'm thinking, wow, they have Norway really locked down. How'd they do that? And then you go, oh, okay, look at the founders, look at the team. And it's, yeah, we do tend to stick in our comfort zones maybe a little bit.
Yep. Yeah.
Great.
Not necessarily a bad thing, but how can we, in this ever evolving world that we live in and overnight change of everything, and the world being accessible to us truly at our fingertips. Look at us right now, right? I do think it's pretty important that entrepreneurs do uh, get a little bit pushed out of their comfort zone, get to that uncomfortable piece of that. So I think what you're doing is so important. Having those examples, people that have been there, done that, seeing those pathways is so important. Having those different avenues that they can be leveraging in order to, access these new markets. Because honest, like we don't know what we don't know, and so going into a new market can feel very daunting, even if it is as close as U.S. and Canada is, with just like border on that side. Never mind.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious now, because obviously you have had many, many years of the Canada US connection. And now that you're working with different companies and cultures, do you think there is a mindset that you'd say, well, there's a Canadian mindset, or a South Korean mindset, or things like that, where you'd go, it's so much, I know when I'm speaking with founders from XYZ country that discussing the mindset is going to be a bigger deal than maybe the visa or that kind of thing.
We call it, it's kind of interesting. It's referred to a lot around culture, like that it is, culturally, they're not as aggressive. Culturally, they, won't really be as, they're uncomfortable being as honest or, truthful, sort of confrontation. These kinds of things have come up quite a bit in the last year in working with these different global regions with that. And so I don't know about mindset because we don't kind of get there, they sort of say this, but then do the opposite side. If you're really interested in the US and into this growth, and it's kind of like, well, why aren't you doing these things then? And then I've learned and whatnot, oh, that's sort of like culturally, how, and goes back to comfort.
Foothold America works with many go-to-market consultants. So specifically about the market research and some of the things that businesses will do to ready themselves, in this case for U.S. expansion. And I've found that some have a viewpoint that if you're going to succeed in the US, the founder or founders, or key people at the top that are invested in the company, must move to the US for a year, 2 years, multiple, in order for them to have success in the US. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Well, there's many examples, thankfully, of companies that have kept their roots in their home country, and been very, very successful in that, and grown the business and be known for a Canadian company, a UK company, right? With that. But they didn't do it only staying within their home market. They did travel and they did take advantage of those other regions. And so, for the 10 plus years that I've been really at this intersection, cross-border, helping entrepreneurs, I have, said, you've got to come frequently. You have to get to know that market. That is your target market for, again, whatever reason, customers, capital, just connections, as well. There's so much you can gain, just from experiences from other regions and whatnot. So, pre-pandemic, I would say every 6 weeks to entrepreneurs. And at some point, the entrepreneur, the founder, CEO, they'll make decisions as to where to put their sales team, where their engineer team is, where they're going to be situated. And, they should make decisions for the best of their company, as to what that looks like. But I don't think that you have to take everything and move all of it into the US market. You can gain so much by just traveling frequently And if you're first time into a market and you know that that's an important market for you, spend 3 weeks or a month, like really get into it and,
Right.
understand the lay of the land. In Silicon Valley, it happens so quickly that you get connected to people and all of a sudden, you know everything. You feel like you're local. And if you come back,
Right. There's a pull, isn't there, where people think
yes.
it might 3 weeks turns into 6 years, but
Usually when they come for a period of time, they go back. It's when you say I'm going to move for like just 2 years, then that can
yes,
be 25.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like anywhere. And I've seen lots of entrepreneurs change their LinkedIn profile that says San Francisco Bay Area, but they're really not. They're still
Right.
in Vancouver. I
It's,
talked to one
oh
the other
my,
day.
exactly. Oh my gosh, you're so right. I see that a lot.
Yep.
So just as a follow up to that, because one of the I think the strategic challenges that founders have, and I'm thinking more UK and Europe, as we have a large customer base there. But in addition to that question about should the founder move, and sometimes they plan to, they want to, that's great, and they absolutely will come for lengthy visits. But one of the challenges is, and you mentioned it, sort of touched on it with the fact that there are no borders for tech companies. And a lot of what they want to accomplish in the US is business development. So they are looking for a sales team, people who are already networked in the area. And that could be someone that's a country manager or maybe some more mid-level sales folks. Um, have you seen in the various companies that have come into Silicon Valley where there's a blueprint that is more successful than the other? Yes, the founder needs to come in some of the time, but the local sales folks can represent the culture and the product of the company. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've talked to many founders and have heard many stories. And it doesn't matter if it's coming into the US or you're going to just like any other market, right? How are you really making sure that you're the most successful in that market? And often the boots on the ground, the local people that have experience in that market are best to really help you understand it and be able to figure out how you're driving sales. What is that go to market strategy? What's the ethos, the sense, how does business operate? It's different. And it's even different between Canada and the US, which, we often are viewed as almost a little bit similar, with
Right.
language and culture and whatnot, but business is done differently. And so I think it is imperative that, you don't come in thinking you can just do everything from afar. That
Hmm.
said, you shouldn't also rely so much on, I think that the new market, because you do have your culture, you do have your way of business and your values and whatnot. So those things have to merge. So
Right.
a lot of things. Communication is incredibly important. Being able
Right.
to set milestones. Are we hitting them very quickly? If we're not, let's adjust and be doing that. Not letting that team go. Okay, I trust them. They're going to just do it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, especially at the beginning. But I think what you're saying in some ways is that connection must be there, whether the founder is uh, moving into the country, visiting the country, or the business development folks that know the local market maybe are coming to Canada to meet the developers, meet everybody, and make sure they understand the culture of the company and the objectives.
Especially on the sales side. You think you're hiring somebody that has this great experience that's going to like scale your business really quickly. But if they haven't actually done your stage and scaled at that
Mm,
time and that stage again, that's where we see a lot of failures that happen. Is it's
yeah,
like, well, they've done it in big companies or they've done it in a scaling company. But these different stages are very important. And sometimes, just like with founders, you outgrow your role, right? Where
yeah,
you're, okay, I did really well from like 0 to 10 million, but 10 to
right.
100 is a different cat. So therefore that requires different networks, different
Yeah.
processes, all that kind of stuff.
my third question to you is that you have founded the Canadian Women's Network to close the funding gap between male and female founders in Silicon Valley. Can you give our female listeners some specific tips that can help them overcome the sort of baked in gender bias that they may experience? Because I think that's really important. The numbers just still are so lopsided, and the stories you hear are sort of the same, where it's a different ball game. So can you share some insight about that?
Yeah, and we have a systemic problem, right? Like, and it's not just female founders have to do X differently, and then the cash will open, because there's a lot of male investors, and a lot of male investors that might not really resonate with some of the products that the women founders are actually doing. So if you're, one is always know the room, right? And the classic example is, maybe we have some personal healthcare product and we're trying to pitch this to like a room of male VCs, but they don't have that understanding of why that's important, that period pad or that menopause thing or whatever it is. And so they can't connect with it. They can't understand it. And therefore it's just like, to borrow from like Shark Tank or whatever, I'm out, right? Like,
right.
So one, and what we have now is like a lot more venture capital people that are out there, a lot more women in VC. There's a lot more micro funds that are focused specifically on underrepresented groups. So one, it's just, if that's not the audience for you, then go find that right audience, right? Go find somebody on the other side that, at least understands what it is that you are building and why you're building it. The other thing is we hear too is, we do things because of passion and purpose. We tell a story, we're emotional with things, but at the end of the day, venture capital wants to make money. So entrepreneurs, men and women, but I think male entrepreneurs do this better. They talk to how much money the investor is going to make. Ultimately, they show that within their deck, within their vision, how they're presenting things, the numbers, all of that is like big and bold and out there. And it's not achievable. It's not going to be all of that, but they present such a big, bold vision that shows how they're going to make money. And more often we see where women entrepreneurs will go in and it's more of a story and the product, the problem that it solves, which is very important, but translating how that problem being solved is going to make 10x for that investor is, I think, something that if entrepreneurs can focus on more, female entrepreneurs can focus on more in order to show that, path to it. I think when we talk systemically, though, there does need to be more funding that's available. Maybe even some of these micro funds. They're really good for first stage investment for women entrepreneurs. But if you're only a $10 million fund or even a $50 million fund, you're getting that first investment. You're not often getting a follow-on investment. And I've heard recently from a couple of different founders and funds where that's a little bit harming the woman investor, the woman founder, because they'll get that first tranche of pre-seed or seed money, but they don't have the big names in there. They don't have stronger validity of their investors into them. And so then the, more venture capital guys are going, yeah, that's nice over there, but it almost looks more like a charity than a strong investment indication there. And so I don't know how to solve for that, but I do see that happening where, yes, it's great for the first stage of investment for these female entrepreneurs, but they are hitting a bit of a trough when it's coming to like the next one.
So you've made a great point about knowing the room. And that is even, across cultures, just the the pitching process, say in some European countries versus the US, is very different. So you have to modify to speak to the room. What do US VCs want to hear? So that's all around good advice. And of course, if in that room what they're wanting to hear about is how do I make 10x or more, then of course you need to include that. So great advice there. Do you have any advice sort of flipping the script where if you were to be able to give advice to VCs and say, hey, your portfolio is really lopsided, like you've got one female investor and, just let's assume that we're talking tech products that are, they're not a specific gender product. So any advice for VCs in terms of how they can balance out their portfolios more, or maybe think through some questions they can ask themselves about, is there some, as you said, systemic bias here that, is they're ending up missing some opportunities as a result?
Yeah. Great question. I'd say they have to start doing things differently, So it's not just, okay, you get the pitch in 30 minutes. Yeah, it's a no, I pass kind of thing. If they see a potential or they want to give an opportunity, say, you know what, let me dig into this a little bit. I'm not convinced, but yet it's interesting enough. Take some time with the founder, like peek under the hood, because if it is there, and I'd say that in a lot of cases it is, that there is that opportunity, there is that, return on investment, there is that great founder and grit and determination and all of that, then they have an opportunity to really work with that founder a little bit, maybe at an earlier stage than they would after the investment piece of it. So, sit and have a coffee. I know of one female founder that came to San Francisco as part of my program, and she met with an investor. And in just the course of him being interested, they started to go through the financials. And she said, I had learned so much. I don't care if he invests in me, because just sitting with him and his team and him asking me these questions, I didn't know how to present my pro forma in that way that he wanted to see it. I didn't know how to be able to craft it this way. So that, and I don't think he did invest in her. He was very interested at the time, but he took the time and he had his team take the time. And I don't think it was just because I'm going to invest in this, yes or no, but he did really like the founder. He really liked what she was working on, and he wanted to be able to help her with that. And so that process really did help. So take time.
Yeah, and maybe a little giving back and nurturing and mentoring and all of that.
But us women, we do this all the time, right? We mentor and we provide that. And not to say that men don't do it, but I had one woman a couple of years ago say, for God's sake, men, can you please do the mentoring here? Like, we're doing it all the time. It is actually time that you also really show up in spades to support women and underrepresented groups with it. It's not just a like for like, right? We do have everybody mentoring, entrepreneurs, no matter what.
So, as you know, this podcast is 3 questions, 1 voice, and it's been lovely to have your voice and your expertise for our listeners. Every season, I have a bonus question. And so this bonus question is about cultural differences. And you've heard me talk about the UK and Europe, and there's a lot of work that we do there. And we actually do less work with Canadian companies than we want to. But when you sort of made your move to personally, when you headed to California, can you remember back to some cultural differences that you experienced that sort of with colleagues or employees or other professionals that sort of surprised you? And, we Canadians know Americans, Americans know Canadians, and all of you are very nice. We know how nice you are. Canadians are always polite and nice. So beyond that, though, did you Yeah. Was there something that kind of surprised you and you go, whoa, I'm going to have to, this is a big deal. I'm going to have to do something to adjust to this.
Well, it's a interesting question. The adjustment happened to me, I'd say. And I remember very, very clearly, so to set the stage, I was in my late 20s when I moved to California. And I was really scared. I didn't actually want to move to San Francisco. I felt very overwhelming and big because I grew up in a very small town. And even the cities that I lived in, I lived on the outside of the cities and sort
Right.
of nothing kind of like too big, if you will. And San Francisco felt really big. Nonetheless, living there, I started, you go back home, right? I think back then it was only maybe like once a year, kind of coming back home. And I remember so distinctly coming back within the first like 2 years and being with my family and my parents and just very clearly seeing the shift in the mindset, the shift in the openness that I that I had experienced, and coming back home, realized, wow, my parents were thinking differently, very differently on some subjects, and this was actually particularly in and around race, and racism. And what I didn't kind of realize is that what was happening to me is living in a place like San Francisco, I'm sure the US as well, but it really does push your boundaries of, what's possible and what's out there. And it's so big, right? How can you not go and see all these diverse sort of perspectives? And so I sort of like lived in a more of an insular world. And I came into one that was like really big and vast. And I have a magnet on my fridge that I think I even had when I was in Canada. So maybe I did some future casting here, but it said, the mind once expanded never regains its original shape. And that's what I feel like has happened is it just opens things up. And if we go back to that story of that founder who's going to grow in Western Canada and then grow across Canada and then come to the US market, it's like that. I want to open up her mind to just what is possible that's out there. And then she can choose for sure.
Yes.
But that's where I feel like there is this difference of just like that big, vast openness of possibilities and opportunities. We have it in spades, particularly in Silicon Valley. And that's what was the biggest wow.
Joanne, you have just articulated one of the things that gets me up every day because I believe that the world is a better place when people go to other countries, whether that's to live. And with Foothold America, everybody I'm interacting with is going for a business reason. But your world expands when you go outside of your family, your neighborhood, your community, your country. And it just gives me so much joy when people expand. And I didn't move. I've always wanted to live in another country, but I didn't move out of the United States until I was almost 50. And I just always wanted to try somewhere else. And it's the most magnificent thing. I completely agree with you that once your mind is expanded, it's not going back.
Several years ago, I was organizing a trip for some corporate innovation leaders from Canada coming to the US, because it's not just entrepreneurs that need to, come into the US market or other markets and kind of understand or build networks. And they were just looking, as I say, see where the puck is going. This was in retail tech. And so got them introduced to some investors, some founders, some sort of executive leaders, just lay of the land, a little bit of tech scouting, kind of understand that. And we had lunch with a friend of mine that I was introduced to years before that, who was the past CIO and CTO of large retail brands in the US. I won't name them, but very large brands. We were having lunch, and the innovation leaders from Canada, they sort of viewed where he was working now as almost kind of a slight competitor. And they said to him, this has been great. I think we spent an hour and a half over lunch. Thanks for sharing. But why did you meet with us? Because, there is some competitive nature within our businesses. And you've just taken this 90 minutes with us. And he said, and I don't know, he's definitely in his 50s, this gentleman at this time. And he said, because somebody did it for me 20 years ago when I, needed that. And that's the ethos of Silicon Valley, which I really love, which gets me out of bed every day, is because no matter who it is, like and we bring a lot of different people into rooms for programs and events and things like that. So founders, executives, different kinds of investors, leaders, et cetera. They all have that ethos of wanting to be helpful and give back and pay it forward. So I loved that story. And I hope that also can help entrepreneurs or, again, corporate leaders or anybody else that's coming into the market to say that there is a soft kind of landing pad there. People are really open and you can gain so much, and people are willing to provide their expertise, their advice to you and sit down, be it for 90 minutes or whatnot.
Thank you for joining us for this inspirational episode featuring Joanne Fedeyko, the woman with so many titles, I call her the Silicon Valley Connector. And thank you, Joanne, for making time to share your blueprint for success for businesses wanting to win in Silicon Valley. If you enjoyed today's conversation, subscribe to US Expansion Minipod on your favorite platform. Published on the first and third Wednesdays of every month, you'll find engaging U.S. expansion discussions with industry leaders and innovators. Don't forget to share this with your network. In the comments, you can find a link to Joanne's LinkedIn profile to learn more about her and her work. This has been Joanne Farquharson, President and CEO of Foothold America. And that wraps up our 3 questions for today. Until next time, keep expanding your horizons.